The Nun II is directed by Michael Chaves, who previously directed The Curse of La Llorona and The Conjuring 3. This is his third film in the Conjuring universe. The film takes place in 1956 France, where a priest is murdered and an evil is spreading. And here Sister Irene once again comes face to face with Valak, the demon nun. I had very low expectations for The Nun II because the first film didn't really work for me. The Conjuring films have been hit or miss. I think James Wan's contribution to the franchise has been amazing. I did enjoy The Conjuring 3, this director's previous film, but not all of them have been home runs, and many of them do seem to be a long series of jump scares that don't really amount to anything. I found this to be a much better film than the first. The story is considerably more investing. I don't even remember much of anything about the first movie except for a few scenes. This film certainly has the requisite scares that most fans expect out of a Conjuring universe movie, but it also does quite a bit with its characters that not only the previous Nun film, but many others in the Conjuring universe haven't done. And that's set up a very tragic and real story that involves some rather harsh and surprising violence against characters that normally don't get that violence directed at them. In this film, an early death during the first act made me feel like no one was safe, and that pretty much anybody was expendable. But better yet, the director here has really improved with each movie he's made. The film was edited by Gregory Plotkin, and every scare sequence feels like it's cut just about perfectly. There's plenty of excellent tension-based visuals where the nun is kept in the shadows, or seen but not quite seen. I'll be completely honest, I went into this movie thinking that I probably wouldn't even talk about it. I just wanted to kind of stay up to date with what's going on with horror in theaters nowadays. And about 20 minutes in, I found myself very invested in the story, liking the way it was cut and shot, and wondering when it was going to become the really crappy Nun sequel that I thought it was going to be. Halfway through the movie, I was still wondering, and by the time the film ended, I was totally invested. There's one sequence in particular involving a magazine rack that I do think is an all-timer for the entire franchise. And there's a collection of characters here that are all some way impacted by this demonic presence. An older woman who's still grieving the loss of her son, a single mom and her young daughter at a boarding school, the young daughter wanting her mother to get together with a gardener who works there, and of course Sister Irene and newcomer Deborah, played by Storm Reid, all of whom find themselves connected by the nun. But because the film takes its time to really establish these characters as living, breathing people, all of whom have religious doubt as well as tragic pasts, and in the case of the young girl being severely tormented at school, I actually found myself giving a shit in between the scare sequences. I also tried something with this film that I haven't done in a while. In the past, I've talked about how I tend to not watch or read reviews of a movie before I see it, and that still is true. But it's really hard to avoid seeing the tomato meter score or the Metacritic score, that number. I often will see the number before I see a movie because it's everywhere. It's really hard to avoid if you follow any movie-based websites. But this time around, I decided to not look at even that. So I didn't read any reviews, and I didn't even know what the tomato meter score was before I saw the movie. And so I went in truly without being influenced by anything, and when I left the theater and saw what the score was, I was like, you know what? It's better than that. Because I wasn't thinking about that while I was watching the movie, and I do think that that's something I'm going to try to do as often as possible. I'm really tired of having these preconceptions when I go into movies. I think it's damaging to the film experience, I think it's damaging to filmmakers, and I think it's damaging to the audience. I think we should be able to make up our own mind about these things. I loved that I didn't feel any of that pressure going in. I could just truly experience the movie as it was meant to be experienced, and I do think it made it much better for me. I don't think The Nun II is going to go down as one of the best horror films ever made, but I do think that if this was the 90s and Blockbuster was still around, this would become a popular rental, similar to some of the later films in the Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. There are a handful of choices in the movie that I didn't necessarily agree with, and sometimes characters make logic leaps that seem to just come about from nowhere. There's visions in the movie that Sister Irene has that leads her to believe she has to do certain things. And sometimes it feels like she's just telling us these visions she had and these new motivations she feels where we're not necessarily feeling that transitional motivation that sort of takes someone from point A to point B in a horror movie. It's just sort of happening really quickly. There's a sense of urgency that's built as a result that I didn't really feel was authentic. Beyond that, I thought The Nun II was a very effective horror movie. It does do that thing that a lot of Conjuring movies do where they introduce something meant to maybe do something else. I don't know that it will do what that scene in Conjuring 2 did, which is literally spawn this franchise, but it was acceptable and it did help raise the stakes during the third act, which I thought was surprisingly thrilling. Look, The Nun II was nothing like I thought it would be. I really thought I was just going to go to this movie to kind of check it off, like, yep, saw it. It's in the catalog now of horror movies that I've seen, but I found myself really enjoying it. So guys, if you do have time this weekend, I might check this one out like at a matinee price. I do think that if you are a real horror buff, you're going to find some enjoyment here. Guys, thank you so much as always for watching. Look forward to more videos very soon, and if you like this, you can click right here and get Stuckmanized.